My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. I am a geologist. My work is a study of pressure and time, of the slow, inexorable forces that build mountains and grind them back to dust. I have always found comfort in the logic of rock, in the story told by strata and stone. It is a narrative that is vast, impersonal, and, above all, rational. I am writing this account because the story I now carry in my mind is none of those things. It is intimate, malicious, and utterly insane. I write this because my friends, Dr. Eleanor Vance and Ben Carter, deserve more than the dismissive official report. Lost to an avalanche, bodies unrecovered. That serves as their epitaph. I write this because I need to believe that putting the events into words, arranging them in a sequence, might somehow contain them. It is a futile hope, I know. Some things, once seen, can never be contained again. Our expedition was born from Ellie's particular genius. Dr. Eleanor Vance was a historian at the University of Colorado, but that title is woefully insufficient. She was a pioneer in what she playfully called psychohistory, a discipline of her own making that studied the lingering emotional and psychological imprint of human events upon a landscape. Her thesis was that places, especially those of great ambition and great failure, retained a kind of memory. She argued that ghost towns were not merely collections of rotting timber. They were scars on the land, resonating with the spectral energy of hope and despair. Her focus for this trip was Lulu City, once the largest mining boomtown in what is now Rocky Mountain National Park. She spoke of it not as a ruin, but as a disintegrating monument to ruined dreams, a place where one could almost feel the ghosts of the past. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and her academic rigor was unimpeachable. She wanted to document the site, to take samples, to write the definitive paper on the psychic death of a frontier town. I was the geologist, the hard science to her more esoteric brand of history. My role was to analyze the geological context of Lulu City, to understand the rock that had promised so much and delivered so little, leading to the town's swift abandonment. I was there to ground her theories in the physical world, to explain the mineralogy that had sparked a brief, frantic gold rush and the unforgiving topography that had ultimately extinguished it. The third member of our party, our anchor to the practical world, was Ben Carter. Ben was a wildlife biologist, a man who had spent 2 decades with the U.S. Forest Service before becoming a private guide and consultant. He was, without exaggeration, the most competent man I have ever known. The Rockies were not just his office, they were his native language. He could read a game trail like a sentence, predict weather from the smell of the air, and identify every plant, animal, and bird by sight or sound. He was a man of empirical evidence, a skeptic of anything that couldn't be tracked, measured, or dissected. He viewed Ellie's theories with a kind of affectionate amusement, but he respected her intellect. He agreed to guide us because he was a friend, and because the opportunity to spend a week in the deep backcountry, observing elk herds and checking for signs of pine beetle infestation, was his idea of a perfect holiday. The 3 of us represented a complete system of inquiry. Ellie had the human past, I had the deep, geological past, and Ben had the living, breathing present. We believed, with the quiet confidence of experts, that there was no phenomenon we might encounter in those mountains that our combined knowledge could not classify, explain, and understand. That was our first and most fatal mistake. We were setting out to study a place of failure, never imagining that we were walking directly into our own. The journey began as all such expeditions do, with a sense of boundless optimism and the clean, sharp bite of high-altitude air. We started our trek from the Dunraven trailhead on the park's less traveled west side, our packs meticulously organized, our permits in order. Ben, in his element, ran us through a final gear check with the stern patience of a drill sergeant. He inspected the seams on our tents, the expiration dates on our emergency flares, and the seals on our mandatory park-issued bear-resistant food canisters. "Remember the rules," he said, tapping the side of my canister with a thick finger. "Food, trash, anything with a scent, toothpaste, deodorant, all of it, goes in here. And the canister stays at least 200 feet from the tent, triangle formation with you, and the cooking area. We're not giving a black bear any reason to get curious." It was a lecture we had heard before, but we listened dutifully. We were professionals, and we respected the rules. The regulations of the National Park Service are not arbitrary. They are a script for survival, written in the hard-won experience of countless encounters with the known dangers of the wilderness. We followed them to the letter. We were not careless city dwellers stumbling into the wild. We were prepared. We were competent. And it made no difference at all. The rules we so carefully followed were designed to protect us from bears and mountain lions. They offered no guidance on how to deal with something that wasn't interested in our food, something that was interested only in us. The first day's hike was magnificent. We moved through forests of aspen and pine, the trail climbing steadily, the world of roads and cell signals falling away behind us. We made camp that first evening at a designated site called Halfway, a beautiful spot nestled in a stand of lodgepole pines with a clear, fast-moving creek nearby for water. As the sun began to set, the sky bled into shades of orange and purple, and the distant peaks of the Never-Summer Mountains began to shift in color. They became a deep, ethereal blue. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Ellie said, her voice soft with awe. "Really scattering," I said, unable to resist the geological impulse. "It's the same reason the sky is blue. Sunlight is made of a spectrum of colors, each with a different wavelength. Blue light has a very short wavelength, so it scatters more easily when it hits the molecules in the atmosphere. The more atmosphere you look through, like when you're looking at a distant mountain, the more blue light gets scattered toward your eyes, making the mountain itself appear blue." Ellie smiled. "There's always a scientific explanation, isn't there?" Alice stared. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and looked into the darkening woods. The old prospectors around here had a different one, a story. Ben, who was filtering water by the creek, grunted. "Here we go." "Oh, hush you," she said, nudging him with her boot. "It's called The Legend of the Blue Mist. It dates back to the 1880s. Around the time Lulu City was dying out, there was a prospector. They called him Miner Bill. He was known to be a bit eccentric. Spent a year in an asylum, apparently, before coming up here to stake his claims in Horseshoe Park." She had our full attention now. Her voice was perfect for storytelling, a low, captivating cadence that drew you in. Bill lived alone in a small cabin. When he'd come into town for supplies, he'd ramble to himself, talking about the divine, and about a deep, abiding fear of something he called the blue mist. He claimed that on cloudy nights, a strange, thick blue mist would roll in around his cabin. It wasn't fog, he said. It was different, colder, and within the mist, a being would manifest. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the evening chill. The being, whatever it was, always left tracks. Ellie continued, her eyes wide in the flickering firelight. 3 toed claw marks deep in the snow or the mud. Marks on the trees, too. Animals would turn up dead near his cabin, nothing left but bones. and Bill was convinced it was the work of this thing in the mist. Then, one spring, Bill went missing. A search party found him, or what was left of him. Just his bones, picked clean, surrounded by those same 3 toed animal tracks. A profound silence fell over our camp, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rush of the creek. Ben was the first to speak, forcing a chuckle. Sounds like a classic campfire story. A boogeyman cooked up by lonely, half-mad prospectors to explain a mountain lion attack and the effects of bad moonshine. Probably, Ellie conceded, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, it's a fascinating piece of folklore. A perfect example of how people project their fears onto the landscape. I agreed with Ben's logic, of course. It was the only explanation that made sense. But as I settled into my sleeping bag that night, listening to the wind sighing through the pines, I couldn't shake the image of those 3 toed tracks. Long after Ellie and Ben's soft snores filled the tent, I lay awake, staring into the impenetrable blackness beyond the thin nylon wall. An unnatural silence seemed to press in from the forest, a quiet so deep it felt like a held breath. And for the first time in my life, I felt the unnerving, prickling sensation of being watched by something I could not see. The sun rose the next morning with a brutal, indifferent clarity, burning away the shadows and the lingering unease of the night. In the sharp light of day, my nocturnal anxieties felt foolish, the product of a crackling fire and a well-told ghost story. Ben was already up, his movements economical and precise as he prepared coffee. He was humming a tuneless, contented sound that was as solid and reassuring as the granite peaks around us. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing me a steaming mug. "Like a rock." I lied, the words tasting metallic. Ellie emerged from the tent, stretching like a cat. "Did you hear that all last night?" "Sounded like a bar doll, but we're a bit high for them." Ben shrugged. "Probably a great horned. They're all over. Sound can play tricks out here." He glanced at me, a knowing look in his eye. "Spooked by Minor Bill's ghost, Alistair?" I forced a laugh. "Hardly. I was just contemplating the thermodynamic properties of my sleeping bag." The lie was thin, but it served its purpose. We were scientists, after all. An ecologist, a geologist, a historian. We dealt in facts and evidence, not in bumps in the night. The feeling of being watched, the oppressive silence. It was just my brain playing tricks on me. A phenomenon perhaps explainable by temporal lobe lability or some other neurogenic process that creates such experiences. We packed up camp, adhering to the strict leave no trace principles, and were back on the trail by 8. The landscape began to change as we gained elevation. The lodgepole pines gave way to sparser forests of subalpine fir and Engelmann spruce. The trail grew steeper, a rugged path of stone and earth that followed the tireless ascent of the terrain. We were truly in the backcountry now, the last vestiges of the civilized world a distant memory. The air was thin and clean, and the silence was no longer menacing, but majestic. For a few hours, I felt my unease melt away, replaced by the familiar, grounding rhythm of the hike. It was Ben who found them. He stopped so abruptly that I almost walked into him. He was staring at a patch of damp earth just off the trail, his usual easygoing expression replaced by one of intense, professional focus. "What is it?" Ellie asked, coming up beside him. "Tracks," he said, his voice low. He crouched down, his fingers tracing the air just above the impression. "Odd ones." I knelt beside him. There in the mud were 3 distinct prints. Each had 3 long, slender toes, tipped with what looked like a deep claw mark. They were arranged in a tight, almost bird-like pattern, but they were far too large for any bird I knew of. and the depth of the impressions suggested a significant weight. They were eerily similar to the tracks Ellie had described from the legend of Miner Bill. "What do you make of it, Ben?" I asked. He was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," he admitted, and the simple admission sent a fresh spike of dread through me. Ben knew everything about these mountains. For him to be stumped was like a priest admitting he didn't recognize a crucifix. The three-toed pattern is typical of birds, like a grouse or a turkey, but these are too big, too deep, and there's no rear pointing hallux mark. It's not a bear or a mountain lion. Their tracks are completely different. Not a deer or an elk, obviously. It almost looks like three tracks overlapping. He poked at the edge of one print. But the displacement of the mud is all wrong. Whatever made this, it put its foot down right here. Ellie was captivated. Could it be a deformity? A bear with a birth defect? Possible, but unlikely to be three of them, all walking in a perfect line, Ben said, pointing further up the trail. The tracks continued, marching in a straight, deliberate path that crossed the trail and disappeared into the dense undergrowth on the other side. And look at the stride. It's long, longer than any animal I'd expect to see up here. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the impossible prints. Ben, the man of evidence, was confronted with evidence he couldn't explain. Ellie, the psychohistorian, looked as though she had just found the Rosetta Stone of her field. And I, the geologist, felt the solid ground of my rational world begin to fracture. We were miles from any road, in a wilderness governed by the immutable laws of biology and physics. And yet, here was a set of tracks that belonged to nothing. The rest of the hike to Lulu City was a quiet, tense affair. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind, made me jump. The majestic wilderness now felt alien and hostile. We were intruders here, and we were being watched. We arrived at the site of Lulu City in the late afternoon. It was less a ghost town and more a ghost of a town. A few crumbling log cabins, their roofs long collapsed, stood like skeletal remains in a high-altitude meadow. The Colorado River, little more than a boisterous creek here, tumbled past the ruins. The air was thick with a profound sense of failure. You could almost feel the desperation of the miners who had flocked here in 1879, chasing rumors of gold, only to be defeated by the brutal winters and the low-grade ore. "This is it," Ellie breathed, her eyes sweeping across the scene. "This is what I was talking about. It's not just history, it's an emotional scar. The weight of all that broken hope, it's still here." She was right. The place felt heavy, sorrowful. It was a landscape haunted by memory. We set up our camp in a designated site, a few hundred yards from the main ruins, following all the park regulations to the letter. We placed our bare canisters a careful 200 feet away, cooked our meal, and tried to pretend this was just another night on the trail. But the easy camaraderie of the first night was gone, replaced by a brittle tension. Ben was uncharacteristically quiet, cleaning his gear with a focused intensity that betrayed his unease. Ellie was scribbling furiously in her notebook, her academic excitement warring with a palpable fear. As dusk settled, the temperature plummeted. The sky, which had been a brilliant, cloudless blue, became overcast with a speed that felt unnatural. And then, the mist began to roll in. It wasn't like normal fog. This was the blue mist from the legend. And my scientific mind scrambled to explain it. It wasn't Rayleigh scattering, the phenomenon that makes distant mountains appear blue. This was close, tangible. It wasn't the release of volatile organic compounds from the pines, which can create a blue haze. This was thicker, colder, and it seemed to absorb the light rather than scatter it. It swirled in strange, oily eddies, clinging to the ground and weaving through the skeletal remains of Lulu City. A deep, penetrating cold came with it, a chill that went straight to the bone, far colder than the ambient temperature drop should have allowed. "My God," Ellie whispered, staring into the roiling vapor. "It's real." Ben had his hand on the handle of the small hatchet he kept on his belt. "Everyone stay close to the fire." The world outside our small circle of firelight dissolved into a swirling blue-gray nothingness. The silence from the first night returned, but this time it was worse. It was a predatory silence, filled with a terrifying sense of anticipation. And then we heard it. It started as a faint clicking sound, like rocks being tapped together. Then came a low chittering, a sound that was horribly, unsettlingly organic. It was followed by a sound that I will never be able to adequately describe. It was a mimicry of a human voice, but hideously distorted, as if a recording was being played backward and forward at the same time. It formed something that was almost a word, a question, but the sound was stretched and mangled, filled with a wet, guttural static. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not a known animal. This was not a trick of the wind. This was something intelligent, something malevolent. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. My scientific framework, the lens through which I viewed the entire universe, shattered. The world was not a logical, ordered place. It was a place of impossible tracks, of sentient mists, of voices that mocked the very concept of language. I felt a surge of primal terror, so profound it was almost religious, a feeling of being in the presence of something ancient and utterly inimical to human life. Suddenly, Ben let out a sharp, choked cry. He was staring past me, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. I spun around. For a split second, through a gap in the swirling blue mist, I saw a shape. It was tall and impossibly thin, a stick, figure silhouette of skeletal limbs that seemed to bend at the wrong angles. Its form was gaunt, emaciated, yet it moved with a horrifying speed. But the most terrible thing was its head. It was a long, narrow skull, like that of a deer or elk, but bleached white and adorned with a rack of dark, jagged antlers. And from the empty sockets, 2 points of faint, blue light glowed with cold, predatory intelligence. Then it was gone, swallowed by the mist. A scream tore from Ellie's throat. Ben scrambled backward, tripping over a log. I was frozen, my mind unable to process the abomination I had just witnessed. It was a creature from a nightmare, a thing that should not exist. It was a Wendigo, a spirit of the hungry north, a myth of starvation and cannibalism made flesh, and it was hunting us. The silence that followed was broken by a new sound. A soft, rhythmic scraping. It was coming from the direction of our bear canisters. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then, a loud crack, like thick plastic shattering under immense pressure. Ben's face went pale. "It's not after our food," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's showing us it can get to it. It's telling us we're the only thing on the menu." Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It strips away reason, dissolves expertise, and leaves behind only the raw, screaming animal instinct to survive. In that moment, huddled by our dying fire, the three of us, the scientist, the historian, the survivalist, were reduced to nothing more than prey. The sound of our bear canisters being destroyed, not by a hungry animal, but by a calculating intelligence, was the sound of our world ending. It was a declaration. The rules we lived by, the careful preparations we had made, were a joke. "It's playing with us," Ellie whispered, her voice ragged with terror. She was rocking back and forth, her arms wrapped around her knees. The legends, they say the Wendigo enjoys the fear. It savors it. The hunt is the real meal. Ben, who had scrambled back to his feet, was a statue carved from ice. The hatchet was still in his hand, but it looked like a child's toy against the memory of that skeletal form. "Wuss, stay in the light," he commanded, his voice a low growl that barely masked a tremor. "Alistair, get more wood. Now." His order cut through my paralysis. I moved my limbs feeling clumsy and disconnected, and began grabbing any piece of dry wood I could find near the edge of our camp. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the branches. Every foray into the edge of the darkness was a fresh wave of terror. The blue mist eddied and flowed, just beyond the fire's reach, a shimmering, malevolent curtain. I felt its coldness, a palpable pressure against my skin. I could feel its eyes on me, the cold, blue pinpricks of light I had seen in that impossible, antlered skull. The night became a waking nightmare, a siege of psychological warfare. The creature never showed itself again, but its presence was a constant, suffocating weight. It circled our camp, a predator testing the strength of our cage. We heard the clicking sounds, sometimes close, sometimes far. Then came the mimicry. It started with a perfect imitation of a bird call, a Steller's jay, but it was wrong. It was midnight, and the sound was hollow, distorted. Then it began to mimic our voices. "Ellie," a voice whispered from the mist, a perfect copy of my own. "Come out, Ellie. I found something." Ellie let out a strangled sob and pressed herself against Ben, who stood with his back to the fire, hatchet raised, staring into the blue void. "Ben," a different voice called, this one a grotesque parody of Ellie's, high-pitched and stretched like taffy. "Help me. I'm lost." It was a calculated cruelty, designed to fray our nerves, to turn us against each other, to break our minds before it broke our bodies. The sounds were punctuated by long stretches of that profound, listening silence. We fed the fire obsessively, our dwindling woodpile a measure of our remaining time. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Our reality had been dismantled, and we were adrift in a landscape of pure malevolence. I am a geologist. I understand pressure. I have studied the immense forces that can bend and break solid rock over millennia. But the pressure of that night was something else entirely. It was the pressure of a single, focused will, a predatory consciousness that was actively, intelligently trying to unmake us. My scientific mind, my anchor in a rational world, was gone. In its place was a raw, primal terror and a single, recurring thought: we are going to die here. Dawn, when it finally came, was not a reprieve. It was an illumination of our doom. The blue mist did not burn away with the first rays of sun. It seemed to recede, to draw back into the trees, as if its work was done for the moment. The air warmed, but the coldness inside us remained. In the gray morning light, we looked at each other and saw the same hollow-eyed exhaustion, the same stark terror. Ben was the first to move. "The canisters," he said, his voice a rasp. We walked, huddled together like frightened children, the 200 feet to where we had stored our food. The sight that greeted us was worse than anything I could have imagined. The bare canisters, made of a high-impact polymer designed to withstand the full force of a 600-pound grizzly, were not just broken. They were obliterated, shattered into hundreds of small, sharp-edged fragments, scattered across the ground as if a bomb had gone off inside them. Our food, our toothpaste, our supplies were smeared and trampled into the mud amidst the plastic shrapnel. "No animal did this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The force required." "It wasn't trying to get the food," Ben said, his eyes scanning the tree line. "It was sending a message. It can get to us whenever it wants. The canisters, the tent, none of it matters. We were defenseless. We had no food, no way to call for help. And we were a full day's hard hike from the trailhead. And we knew, with a certainty that settled in our bones, that the thing was still out there watching us. Waiting. "We have to move," Ben said, taking charge, his training kicking in despite the impossible circumstances. "We'll pack up only what's essential: the tent, sleeping bags, water filter, first aid. We leave everything else. We move as fast as we can. We don't stop." The plan was desperate, a sliver of hope in an ocean of despair. As we frantically stuffed our gear into our packs, our hands clumsy with fear and cold, I saw Ellie staring at the ruins of a nearby cabin. "It's the hunger," she said, her voice distant. "It's an Algonquin legend. The Wendigo is the spirit of insatiable hunger, of starvation in the winter. It's created when a man resorts to cannibalism. It grows larger with every meal, but its hunger is never satisfied. It is gluttony and greed made flesh." "Ellie, not now," Ben snapped. "Don't you see?" She insisted, her eyes wild. This place, Lulu City, it was a place of failure, of desperate greed. The miners who came here were starving for wealth. They failed. Maybe one of them didn't fail. Maybe one of them found a different kind of sustenance. Her words hung in the air, a theory more terrifying than any ghost story. The idea that this creature wasn't just a random monster, but a direct result of the history of this place, a psychic scar given monstrous form, was too much to bear. We started our retreat, a forced march of pure terror. We didn't run, but our pace was frantic. Every shadow seemed to hold a skeletal shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a mocking whisper. The beautiful, majestic Rockies had transformed into a labyrinth of death. And we were not alone. About an hour into our hike, we found the tracks again. They were on the trail ahead of us, fresh in the damp earth. 3 long toes, a deep claw mark. But this time, they were different. They were deeper, the stride longer, and they were leading us. "It's hurting us," Ben breathed, his face ashen. "It's not just following. It's driving us somewhere." The psychological pressure ratcheted up to an unbearable level. We were no longer fleeing. We were being manipulated, puppets in a terrifying game. The creature was toying with us, demonstrating its power, its control over our fate. We were on its trail, not the other way around. We came to a steep, narrow section of the path that cut across a scree slope. Loose rock and gravel shifted under our boots, threatening to send us sliding down the mountainside. It was a place that required careful footing, a place where we had to slow down. It was a perfect ambush point. As I placed my foot on a large, flat rock, I heard a sound from above, not the clicking or the voice, but the sharp crack of rock against rock. I looked up. High on the slope above us, a boulder the size of a small car was dislodged. It wasn't a natural rockfall. It was pushed. "Movi!" Ben screamed. We scrambled, adrenaline surging through us. The boulder crashed down the slope, missing us by feet, but unleashing a cascade of smaller rocks and debris. I threw myself flat, covering my head as stones rained down around me. The air filled with dust and the sharp smell of fractured granite. When the dust settled, I pushed myself up, my ears ringing. Ben was a few feet away, helping a terrified, weeping Ellie to her feet. But something was wrong. The configuration was wrong. There were only 2 of them. "Ben?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Where's Ben?" Ellie just pointed, her hand trembling, her face a mask of utter horror. I followed her gaze. Down the slope, at the bottom of the scree field, lay a figure, twisted and unnaturally still. Ben Carter, the most competent man I had ever known, lay broken at the bottom of the ravine, a casualty of a game we never asked to play. And from the dense woods beyond his body, I saw it step into the open. The tall, skeletal figure with the head of a deer and the cold, blue eyes of an ancient, hungry winter. It turned its head, the antlers scraping against a low, hanging branch, and looked directly at us. It wasn't coming for Ben. His part in the game was over. It was coming for us. Time ceased to be a measurable quantity. It became a thick, viscous fluid of pure terror. My memory of the moments after Ben's death is a chaotic slideshow of disconnected images, a narrative fractured by fear. There was the creature, standing over Ben's broken form, not with the frenzy of a predator, but with the calm, proprietary air of an artist admiring his work. The deer skull tilted, the dark antlers like a dead tree against the sky, and the 2 points of blue light, the only color in that gray, desolate landscape, fixed on us. It was not looking at Ben, it was looking at its next course. A sound escaped Ellie's throat, a thin, animal keen of pure despair. That sound broke the spell. We turned and ran, not with any plan or direction, but with the blind, mindless panic of cornered animals. We scrambled back up the scree slope, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. We could feel its presence behind us, a cold wave of malevolence that followed us like a shadow. It didn't pursue us immediately. The hunt was a game, and it was a patient player. It let us run, letting the terror build, letting our hope curdle into exhaustion. The forest, which had once been a place of scientific inquiry and natural beauty, became a green hell. Every tree was a potential hiding place for it, every shadow awaiting ambush. We crashed through undergrowth, thorns tearing at our clothes and skin, our breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. "It's the greed," Ellie gasped, stumbling beside me. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes held a terrifying, feverish clarity. She was no longer just a historian. She was a prophetess staring into the abyss of her own theories. "Don't you see, Alistair? It's not just a monster in these mountains. It is the mountains. It's the spirit of this place." "What are you talking about?" I yelled, dragging her over a fallen log. "Lulu Citipal. The gold rush. Hundreds of men, driven by insatiable greed, starving for wealth they could never find." Her voice was rising, becoming hysterical. What is a Wendigo, if not that? The spirit of insatiable hunger, of gluttony that is never satisfied. It grows with every meal, but it's always starving. We came here to study a place of failure, but we didn't understand. The failure didn't just fade away. It festered. It became this thing. It's the psychic echo of their greed, given flesh and bone and antlers. Her words were the ravings of a mind pushed beyond its limits, but they struck me with the force of a physical blow. The neat categories of my world, geology, biology, history, were meaningless here. They were all just facets of the same horrifying truth. We weren't being hunted by a cryptid. We were being hunted by a ghost, the collective, hungry ghost of 100 years of human failure. A sound split the air, shattering our frantic flight. It was the sound of a child crying, a high, pitiful wail that seemed to come from just ahead of us, to the left of the game trail we were blindly following. "No," I whispered, grabbing Ellie's arm. "It's a trick." But the sound was too perfect, too evocative. It bypassed reason and went straight for the heart. Ellie stopped, her head cocked, her expression torn between terror and a deep, ingrained empathy. "Maybe someone's hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "Child!"
Ali, no! It's the mimicry!
I pleaded, pulling at her, but the crying intensified, turning into a desperate shriek of,
"Mommy."
and then, From the right, we heard a different sound, the heavy, deliberate snapping of a large branch. It was behind us, and it was close. The creature was flanking us, using the phantom cries to drive us, to separate us. In that moment of pure, calculated terror, we broke. Ellie, responding to some deep, maternal instinct twisted by the creature's cruelty, veered left, toward the crying. I screamed her name, but she was gone, swallowed by the dense furs. I made a split-second decision, born of cowardice and the primal urge to live. I kept running straight. I abandoned her. That knowledge is a stone in my gut that I will carry for the rest of my life. I ran, and as I ran, the sound of the crying child abruptly stopped. It was replaced by a single, piercing scream. It was Ellie's voice, and it was a sound of such ultimate, soul-shattering agony that it will echo in my nightmares until the day I die. Then, silence. A silence more profound and terrible than any sound. I don't know how long I ran after that. Hours. A day. My mind was a white, hot blank of terror. I have vague, flashing memories of falling, of crawling, of sobbing in the dirt. I remember the sun setting and the world plunging into a darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. I spent the night huddled at the base of a rock outcropping, shivering uncontrollably, starting at every whisper of the wind, convinced that the dear, skulled face would appear out of the blackness at any moment. But it never came. The game was over. It had fed. Sometime during the next day, I stumbled out of the forest and onto a trail. A real trail, marked and maintained. A short time later, 2 hikers found me. They saw a man, wild-eyed and babbling, covered in scratches, his clothes in tatters. They saw a victim of exposure and hypothermia, a man whose mind had clearly snapped under the strain of being lost in the wilderness. They gave me water and a granola bar and used their satellite messenger to call for help. A park ranger met us on the trail and escorted me back to the trailhead, back to a world of cars and logic and rules. I tried to tell them. I told them about Ben, about Ellie, about the tracks, the blue mist, the creature. They listened with practiced patience, the kind of gentle condescension one uses for a traumatized child or a madman. The official report is concise and logical. Docker, Eleanor Vance and Ben Carter, lost in an unseasonable blizzard, were likely killed in an avalanche on a steep, unstable slope. My own account was attributed to paranormal-like experiences, brought on by a combination of high altitude, exhaustion, hypothermia, and the psychological trauma of losing my friends. Sense presence. They called it a known neurogenic process. They searched for weeks, but no bodies were ever found. Of course not. There was nothing left to find. I am Dr. Alastair Finch. I was a geologist. I once found comfort in the logic of rock and the vast, rational story of deep time. But that man is gone, buried somewhere in the Rocky Mountains along with my friends. I am now the keeper of a different story. A story of a hungry, malevolent spirit born from the dark heart of human greed. I write this not because I expect to be believed, but because I must. It is the only thing I have left. I am a haunted man, a living ghost of an expedition that went looking for history and found an ancient, waiting hunger. Some nights when the wind howls I can almost hear it, a distorted mimicry of a voice, whispering my name from the distant, blue mountains. The mountains remember, and they are still hungry.